So good afternoon, everyone. We are going to wait just 2 minutes more, and then we will start. Okay, so good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome everybody to this side event co-organized by the government of Ghana and the Swiss Foundation for Climate Protection and Carbon Offset, in brief the KliK Foundation, with the support of Perspectives Climate Group. I want to extend a warm welcome to the audience and our distinguished set of panelists. Happy to see you here and looking forward for a very engaging and interactive session. My name is Ximena Samaniego. I'm part of the Perspectives Climate Group, and I'll be moderating this event. Before we start, I will lead you through the housekeeping rules. So, as you may know, this event is being streamed through the UNFCCC channel. There will be a Q&A section as a closing point of the agenda. Therefore, for virtual participants, I'd like to invite you to post your questions in the chat. And for the on-site audience, I would like to invite you to raise your hand and to come in at that moment. My colleague will pass you the microphone. So, yeah. Then, to start, I'd like to contextualize this event briefly. So, considering that Article 6 aims to enhance countries' climate ambition and strengthen their low-carbon development path based on collective action for the NDC achievement, one of the pioneer countries that decided to engage in early Article 6 action was Ghana, by signing a bilateral agreement with Switzerland in 2020. The agreement is the first of its kind in Africa and sets the framework conditions for cooperation under Article 6.2. An implementation roadmap for this bilateral agreement was signed also in 2021. It included establishing a comprehensive set of enabling conditions for the implementation of the institutional arrangements and procedures for the development of the activities under the rules of Article 6.2. Beyond the cooperation with Ghana, Switzerland and the KliK Foundation are pioneering Article 6 activities in different countries and sectors around the globe. In that sense, this event seeks to present and discuss the Article 6 readiness efforts undertaken by these two countries, focused on the arrangements done at national level and the lessons learned that could be extended to Eastern African countries, where Article 6 readiness efforts are also taking place. Well, regarding the agenda, we will begin with a series of presentations by our selected panelists. Two of them will participate virtually. After that, there will be a panel discussion that focuses on further exploring the challenges and opportunities that the early implementation of this bilateral agreement has generated. And last but not least, a Q&A session will take place, as mentioned earlier. So without further comments, I would like to welcome our first panelist, who is joining us virtually, Dr. Daniel Benefoh, who is the Deputy Director at the Climate Change Unit of Ghana's Environmental Protection Agency. He is responsible for low carbon development issues, MRV, and carbon markets, and he's also one of the co-organizers of this event. He will present the governance arrangements and the Article 6 national framework adopted in Ghana. So I'm gonna change to so Daniel, if you could please share your screen. I can't see Daniel online, but let me just.
Hello, I'm online. Hi, hello.
Hi, hi, Daniel. Okay, so glad to hear you, and please, I will invite you to share your screen, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Let me share my screen. Please, trying to share my screen, so just partner with me.
Okay.
Please, can you confirm if you can see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
All right. So, good morning to everybody, and good afternoon to other colleagues from other parts of the world. I am sharing my Ghana's experience so far in participating in the cooperative approaches so far. I would talk briefly about the what we have been doing so far, and our lessons that we have already had. So I'll talk about the policy context, how the MDCs, Ghana's MDCs, as a policy is interlinked with the Article 6.2 framework.
Sorry, Daniel, I might have to interrupt you, but we are not seeing the presentation. The screen is just without any. Yeah.
Try again. I don't know. I can try again once more. Please, can you confirm see my screen?
We are seeing the screen, but we are not seeing the presentation. It's in a different mode. It is not like in presentation mode.
In the presentation mode.
Yeah.
Let me try once more.
Yeah, well, these technical things used to happen. Don't worry.
Can you see the screen now in presentation mode?
No, not really.
Sorry. Anyway, I sent a copy to you, and Mischa, I don't know whether you can do it from your end, because my screen is already in presentation mode. Let me try once more. So can you see my screen again?
Yeah, we are seeing it, but it's not in the properly mode. Okay. Let me just give me a minute and I will try to share mine. And please, audience, give me a minute as well to connect the presentation as well. Oh, no, now it's working. Okay, yeah, so now we are seeing the screen. Perfect. So please, Daniel, the floor is yours.
All right, I'm sorry for this.
No worries at all. Yeah.
So, as I was saying, I intend to share our experience so far in engaging with the 6.2 cooperative approaches. And I will talk briefly about the policy context our efforts in enabling the national conditions to support participation in 6.2, our efforts regarding sourcing and development of projects, and also capacity development. So in last year, 2021, Ghana published its updated NDCs. And we are yet to start working on the long-term emission development plan as required under 4.19 of the Paris Agreement. In the meantime, the national policy context is anchored on the national climate change policy, within which the NDCs are interlinked. We have articulated in the NDCs the importance of using Article 6.2, participating in the voluntary 6.2 cooperative approaches to support the achievement of the NDCs. And in that respect, indicated the fact that this engagement could lead to mobilizing support for implementing the NDCs and also upping the ambition of NDCs over time. It is also in this same context that we think that the 6.2 cooperative approaches could also as well increase the participation of private sector in implementing the NDCs and of course supporting the local development benefits that come with it as well. And above all, also the support for adaptation as well. So in this regard, we have carefully analyzed the A6.2 cooperative approaches guidelines as captured in the decision 2C3, and we think that we are ready to start to implement it, in a sense that we have met the basic participation requirements indicated in this ACS 2.2 guidelines. And not only have we published our NDCs and maintained the NDCs in the interim registry, we have also published our latest national inventory reports, and we shall do so on a regular basis as required under the Article 13 of the Paris Agreement and the MPGs that is associated with it. We have also, at the national level, adopting a national Article 6.2 framework, which is going to be the flagship effort of establishing the national framework for authorizing ITMOs, tracking the transfer and use of ITMOs, and also reporting the engagement in A6.2 cooperative approaches. So we hold the view that the national framework is a very important step in paving the way to engaging in A6.2 cooperative approaches in Ghana. And as a result, we are clear in our minds as to the obligations that come with it. The obligation of adherence to the very basic requirement of ensuring environmental integrity, in ensuring that we use the authorization tool to demonstrate additionality, and very importantly, ensuring that we do not authorize non-additional activities. And therefore, we have set out a clear procedure for authorization and using the same procedure to achieve what we called additionality. And therefore, in the NDCs, the unconditional NDCs are what we call the red list, and those that are available for authorization under 6.2 is what we call the white list and other activities. We are also clear in our minds as to the requirement in ensuring transparency in in both the GAG and the NDC accounting, and ensuring that a national registry system is put in place to avoid double counting and double claiming, and also applying corresponding adjustments. And all these are captured in the national framework. And at the same time, ensuring that in doing this, we also ensure that the benefit that comes with it also benefits the people of Ghana as well. So the framework, as I said, is the flagship national effort to domesticate the effort of participating in the A6.2. A draft of the national framework was prepared last year, December, and it is, as I said, it is the main flagship program to ensure that we establish a national arrangement for A6.2, and also to provide guidance for the voluntary carbon market. So the framework has a three purposes. The first one is being a way to domesticate the A6.2 national arrangement, and also provide guidance for voluntary carbon market projects, and also build a foundation for linking the structures, the A6.4 and the A6.8 structures in the future as is being developed. So that is the broad overview of the framework. The first draft of the framework was prepared in December. It has been open for comments, and we are now closed for comments as at May. The draft is ready, the second draft is ready for submission to the cabinet for approval. And once cabinet approve of it, the Environmental Protection Act 490 is the law that is going to back the implementation of the various aspects of the framework. On the right side of the slide are the elements that are covered in the framework. So first, it covers two very important things. It covers the key elements as articulated in decision 2CMA3, and also the bilateral agreement that Ghana has engaged in with its partners. So these elements are key to the principles and the requirements in both the A6.2 guidelines as well as the bilateral agreement that Ghana is engaging. So I don't intend to go over them. I think it's quite common to everybody. But what I want to stress is that we have, as much as possible, tried to cover all the elements, including the institutional arrangements, the procedures for authorization, the procedures for transfer, the procedures for tracking use of the ITMOs, and the procedures for corresponding adjustment and reporting, and also the procedures for enhancing ambition of mitigation and also adaptation. So we have covered as much as we could, and also not only addressing the requirements, but we have also provided the tools for operationalizing them. So not only have we covered the element or the policy positions of these elements, but also we have also indicated in the framework a section where we can implement these interventions on the ground as well. So this is one example of how we intend, for example, the options for authorization, registration, issuance, and transfer. So this is just to give you a sense of how it looks like. So again, I don't intend to take you through this, but I want to say that we have designed a framework in a way that you can have issuances and transfers on the Ghanaian registry, or you can have registration and issuances on other international registry systems, but all transfers of ITMOs will happen on the Ghanaian registry system. And we have also provided indication as to how the Ghanaian registry system can be interlinked with the voluntary carbon market projects. So this is just to give you a sense of how we are thinking around the use of the Ghanaian registry system, the other international registry system, and how they are linked to registration and issuance and transfers. The other point I wanted to highlight is also that in the framework, we have also, on the left side of the slide, we have indicated in the framework how we intend to be consistent in apportioning or in applying or the format for the unique serial numbering of the ITMOs. And this is based on the section VA, the section 5A of the decision symmetry. So we try to implement them in the framework. And on the right side is also how we intend to track the multiple uses of the ATMOs. So as much as possible, not only have we addressed the elements in the framework, but we have also attempted to kind of operationalize them on the ground as well. So on sourcing and mitigation activity development, in terms of engagement with our colleagues, so bilateral engagement, so we are fully much involved with in that we are engaged with what we call the 3S. And the 3S, the first one, the grandfather of the 3S is our engagement with the pioneering engagement with our colleagues from Switzerland. And that engagement gave us a lot of experience, a lot of learning on the job experience, and eventually signing an agreement in November 2020. And that agreement had led to some amount of activity that is keeping everybody busy, even now. And on that score, had also been engaging with our colleague from Sweden, and also trying to finalize the agreement. We are also in conversation with our colleague from Singapore as well. The key point about this agreement is not about the making of the agreement, but making sure that the agreement themselves, all the three of them, are consistent and have the same minimum standards across the board. So that is the essence of this agreement. And these agreements, again, I must say that are also very important to create the needed positive signals for the private sector in the country to also take advantage of the opportunities that come with it. Apart from the engagement with the partners, we are also involved with the non-state actors. So again, as a result of that, for example, on the back of the Swiss agreement, KliK Foundation is quite active in Ghana, and there are also other companies that are also exploring opportunities that these engagement presents. Recently, Talo also is exploring work on REP+ on the voluntary carbon markets area with the Forestry Commission. So on the right side of the slide is to give you a sense of which projects and where they are. So for example, the KliK Foundation already, one of the flagship program is the National Clean Energy Access Program, which, as we speak now, is at a point of validation. They had requested a letter of assurance, and that letter of assurance has been given. We have also issued a letter of recommendation, and we are waiting for the completion of the validation report for us to proceed to the next stage of the process. Another very interesting engagement with the Swiss colleagues is also the development of an AWD RISE project, where right now we had also received a request for letter of authorization and also working on an initial report. So we are trying to kind of give life to the requirements in the ACES.2 guidelines. All the rest of the projects, as you can see there, are different stages of progression in the country. Just a few slides, then I'll I think it's going back to me. So I'm sorry, the slide is messed up. Okay, so last slide. So just to conclude, so apart from developing the framework and also engaging in the sourcing and development of projects, we also feel that a very important piece of the conversation is also what to do with the development of capacity. And therefore, with the support of SECO, World Bank, and the UNDP, we have done different types of capacity assessments. And the findings of this assessment is going to feed into the development of a capacity support program with SECO and UNDP, which is now in the offing. We are also exploring options of training and providing awareness to local banks and also potential project developers. we intend to compile a list of local experts who can participate in MRV services, and also planning to compile a carbon market readiness project database. So this is to enable the pipeline and ensure that the Ghanaian private sector is aware of the opportunities and are able to take advantage of the opportunities insofar as they play by the rules. So I want to end here and say thank you for the opportunity. Over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Daniel, for your insightful presentation about the efforts that Ghana is making to cope with these Article 6 requirements. And thank you so much for showing us the processes, the elements, and the linkages with other international initiatives, as well as how you are constructing and perceiving this partnering engagement, especially with the non-state actors, as well as the capacity needs. So thanks a lot. Now, moving forward with the agenda, I'm glad to present our second speaker, Ms. Veronica Elgart, who is also participating virtually today. So, hi, Veronica. She is the Deputy Head of International Climate Policy at the Federal Department of the Environment, Transport, Energy and Communications in Switzerland. She will provide us more information about Switzerland's national framework for Article 6.2 cooperation. So, Veronica, glad to see you as well. If you want, you could share your screen, or if you could prefer, I can share it for you, and the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much. Yes, if you can share the slides, that will be helpful to me.
Okay, perfect. Just a minute.
So while the slides are being uploaded, good afternoon to everyone. It's a pleasure to also share the experiences and lessons learned on the Swiss side of this engagement. And let me just echo very much that on our side, the engagement with our partner countries has led to an informed establishment of the national framework in Switzerland, and we have learned a lot on this joint journey. If you can move to the next slide. It depicts gives the overall picture of how the bilateral agreement and the national frameworks sit together. So if I just recollect that, you have the bilateral agreement that very much in the essence connects the two national frameworks. I think this is very important, and the character of this cooperation that we have been engaging in with our partners in Ghana and also other countries, that the national frameworks are very key. And in fact, it was being impressive to see how this puts the host country of the Article 6 activities in the driving seat. So you have the bilateral agreement connecting the national frameworks, and what it does, it mainly provides investment security to the project partners, and also, of course, to the two governments cooperating, to clarify how we engage with each other and that all the provisions of the Paris Agreement are being met. It at the same time allows direct involvement of the project partners in selling and purchasing ITMOs. So the bilateral agreement and national frameworks provide the framework conditions and allow a direct engagement between the actors of the carbon market. In a very nutshell, the bilateral agreement, authorizes transfers from the government side, guarantee thereby the recognition thereof, and the no double counting, no double claiming. So we actually ensure some of the rules of the game and also give clarity and legal certainty to the investors and project partners. The two national frameworks, we have seen a just very impressive presentation on what's happening in Ghana. In the very core, what is new in our perspective is this establishment of the national framework to take the authorization decision. That it seems also here in Switzerland that we have to do slightly differently from what we learned or had before the Paris Agreement. So this includes a mandate to take the decision, establish procedures involving all necessary stakeholders in the country. There might be needed a decision basis criteria or a fully fledged strategy of how the country wants to use international carbon markets. And it may include sourcing of activities, or also this may be in collaboration with the international partners. That of course can take different forms. If you see on the right box of this slide, the black right box here, that's the national framework of the receiver country. So in the case of Switzerland, the one particularity that in our national law, this clarifies that for the NDC of Switzerland, the entity purchasing, or the ones purchasing the ITMOs, are actually private actor entities. They are the motor fuel importers of Switzerland, and together they have founded the KliK Foundation, who we have also on the panel and will present best, of course, their role themselves. And at the very bottom of the slide, what is complementing the government's instruments at international, national level, there is the purchase agreements between seller and buyer, as mentioned, that they interact between directly. If you go to the next slide, you can see a bit step by step how this cooperation is happening. And with the focus on the national frameworks, I would like to invite you to look at particularly the very left and right columns of the governments, because that is what we need to deliver through the national frameworks to achieve these steps. So very much it is a responsive role of the governments, where the activity owner, those actors of the carbon market, are in the driving seat, and they submit to the governments project proposal, activity proposals. The governments need to take this authorization decision in their national frameworks, and that remains voluntary under the bilateral schemes that we have between Ghana and Switzerland. So this allows the national strategy of what is being authorized towards the international carbon markets to evolve. Once this decision has been taken and it's been positive, the third party, this activity owner, can proceed in the frame of the bilateral agreement to implement the activity. Of course, there's monitoring verification reports, again, submitted to the two governments, who review them and clarify if all criteria are fulfilled for them to be approved. And thereby, finally, we recognize the ITMOs. And again, we state that also in written format, so that the third party has got something very clear in their hands. If you even go one slide further, and we look at this, how we have organized ourselves now in Switzerland, complementing what we just heard on the side of Ghana. So first of all, we do have a law in Switzerland, the CO2 Act, that governs all Swiss climate instruments and policies. And as mentioned before, it does include this obligation to motor fuel importers in Switzerland to partly compensate for the emissions from the sector. So that is how we have very clearly in law written the roles between the private actors in our case and the government. And that is what leads to the foundation KliK, who purchases mainly the ITMOs to comply with this obligation in national law. Very important to note, of course, is that these means that are spent by the KliK Foundation, or in fact by other, at a minor, more smaller scale, other entities from Switzerland to purchase these ITMOs, these means are not counted towards Switzerland's international climate finance. So this is the very ground rules and foundation of our engagement, and it clarifies the roles in the Swiss context, in the Swiss national framework. That law has an ordinance which specifies further the criteria for what type of activity are eligible under Swiss law, and therefore what Switzerland will also be able to authorize under its bilateral agreements. Of course, this includes criteria that are being set at the international level that apply to Switzerland in any case, but there are even some further criteria just a few examples here. In the Swiss legislation, additionality is very key, and it actually is specified as a financial additionality and also some temporal additionality, that only activities that start because of this engagement are eligible under the Article 6. Also, it does include or exclude, in fact, some of the project types, such as, for example, forestry activities from the side of Switzerland. Of course, also the legislation in Switzerland requires demonstration on how the activities contribute to sustainable development as a very central aspect of the Article 6 engagement. You have what is blue on this slide are actually links to publicly accessible documents. So this is the legislations, and now just newly published at the beginning of this month, there has been a communication of the competent authority, the Federal Office of the Environment, that explains how these legal criteria are being applied in more specific terms. And at the very bottom of this slide, in the box, you can just see step by step again in the Swiss framework how such a cooperation, how it is run through. So the third party, either KliK, but it can be any other entity, submits requests to the Swiss government. In fact, this is defined, the Federal Office of the Environment is the competent authority here that receives these submissions. Our office leads also the evaluation of these submissions, and there is an interministerial procedure and bodies established that then jointly take the final authorization decision based on the criteria in the legislation, of course. So once this authorization statement is provided, the activity is being implemented, and again, it is the Federal Office for Environment who receives the monitoring reports and evaluates them, approves them, and also carries through with the recognition of the ICMOS. Just one very last slide, if we can go one further. The lessons learned so far. So the very first message, of course, is we strongly believe, and what we have learned to date, we believe it's becoming true, that the Article 6 can significantly increase global ambition if done right. You know, if the criteria are set in a way that this triggers or unlocks mitigation potential that has high barriers. Clearly goes beyond the NDCs of the partner countries and actually supports establishment of instruments or activities in further areas in the countries. To note that in our bilateral agreements, the ICMOS can be used not just for NDC purposes, but any other voluntary climate objective, and yet still neither the Swiss government nor our partner countries will use them towards their NDC achievement. So this provides also an opportunity for non-government actors to contributing to closing the ambition gap. It is also very clear as a lessons learned that there needs some homework to be done for this to function. There are some new things in this cooperation. So the national frameworks that we have heard from South Ghana and also from ourselves, they do need some preparations. Particularly, we find the national framework to take the authorization decision is the new element that is deriving from the Paris Agreement. We are very happy to be able to collaborate with our partner countries, of course, wherever helpful, to advance this in a meaningful manner. And then when the Article 6 cooperation is running, yes, of course, it does require some capacities on both sides of the government in both countries, just to receive the activity proposals, to evaluate them, to run the authorization decision procedures in the countries, and also to manage the information flow between the governments. Where there is registries, of course, that is much simpler. And to recognize the ICMOS as explained on the slides before. Overall, however, we have also found with our partner countries that it is possible to start simple and to, over time, gain experience with early activities and early engagement and building up the strategies, the fully fledged list of criteria, elaborating on tools as the registries as we go forward. This is all possible to gain this experience, in fact, to build it better than without this experience in the back. And just on the very bottom of this slide, there's again in blue, there's a link to access Switzerland's bilateral agreements under the 6.2. It's all being published very transparently. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Veronica, for clearly showing us how this step-by-step process is being done, and for highlighting very well the needs and the gaps that you have been identifying during this process. Thanks also for showing us as well the importance of the early engagement in these kind of initiatives, and for leaving us the message also about the start simple and gain experience during the process. I consider this is a really highly relevant lesson learned. Now, moving forward with the agenda, I will introduce our third panelist, Mr. Mischa Classen from the KliK Foundation. He will tell us more about KliK's role under this bilateral agreement. So, Mischa, happy to see you here, and the floor is yours.
So, thank you very much. I truly feel honored to be part of this session. We have come a long way. It has been mentioned, 2020 was basically the start of this interaction, and I think it's really an important moment now to be able to announce that two national frameworks are there that allow basically the Article 6 to be rolled out in Ghana. And as has been mentioned, the KliK Foundation, this is not uniquely with the KliK Foundation, so these frameworks hold true for all project developers, voluntary market, so everyone is invited to travel to Ghana and start doing carbon business or carbon development. Now, quickly on the KliK Foundation. So the role of the KliK Foundation, maybe among the demand centers and also the early actors. So the KliK Foundation, we are a small team. However, this is only the international part. We also have a national section, because the KliK Foundation has an obligation also and primarily to bring about emission reduction within Switzerland. Next slide. And this goes back to the obligation of the foundation under the Swiss law, which is basically to offset emissions from the transport sector in Switzerland, which is regulated in a specific policy instrument, and these emission reductions that can be used for this compliance, they have been in the past purely domestically, and going forward there will be a certain demand in also foreign units in compliance and in concordance with the Paris Agreement. So we are speaking of ITMOs. The KliK Foundation is funded by the obligated subjects, the fuel importers, and also funded by them through kind of a levy on the fuel sales in Switzerland. So while tanking, the Swiss population basically pays this money, and this will be, this is used to develop and organize and buy basically these ITMOs from 2021 onwards until 2030. We expect to be required to deliver 20 minimum up to the complete or the total NDC value of Switzerland for the foreign NDC part of 40 million ITMOs. And looking at Ghana, and I really gear this presentation towards Ghana, we would hope or expect to get an effect in the order of magnitude of 5 million ITMOs in aggregate up until 2030, which roughly translate into a support volume of $100 million over that period, and that could or would roughly leverage investments in the order of magnitude of $500 million. So that are the ballpark figures of the engagement. Now, the next slide is really colorful, and it can, what has been or explained by Veronica and Daniel, that's in the public, in the upper part of the display. You see the implementation agreement and then the two countries, and each of the country come with this national framework, and this is absolutely important and the prerequisite to allow the private actors to be to work and to discover and implement the mitigation outcome activities on the ground. It is very important to understand that the framework that Switzerland and Ghana have provided in the implementation agreement is a framework which is completely agnostic towards the commercial operation. It merely provides the backbone and the modalities for private actors to engage. There is no obligation, there is no obligation to transfer certain amounts or certain sectors involved. It's really agnostic, and both of the engaging countries, they retain their complete, basically, prerogative to do the ruling according to their so-called national KliK, their national framework and provisions. And it also implies that the KliK Foundation is working on a private contract scheme, basically with private entities as counterparties. And this is important because we are talking a lot of climate change mitigation, but someone has to do it. And this typically is a private enterprise, even if it's mandated or triggered by laws and governed by laws. It's typically a private organization with there needs to be investment, and there needs to be a proper organization that runs the activity going forward. And this, of course, could also be a government agency. It doesn't really matter, but just to understand, we are not. Also, the owner of the units under this agreement is not the state; it is the investor or the owner of the activity. Next. Now that seems all quite familiar to many. So what's the difference then with the CDM? So there are distinct differences. The Article 6 is not the voluntary corporate action. So there needs to be there's a clearly a difference between voluntary corporate actions, and they must not overlap, no double counting. And what's very important to understand, and these are we are always explaining a lot, it is also there must not be an overlap with the policy measures the host country intends to do in order to reach its NDC. Also here there needs to be a clear distinction made, and also the foreign climate finance must not overlap with the activity. So that brings about a certain rigorous approach in the identification and approval. And as Veronica has shown in her diagram, the very first step is a letter of intent, or a letter whatever that will be in every of the countries and arrangements. There needs to be a very early in principle agreement from the government side whether or not the planned activity would interfere with their plans going forward. Just to give a concrete example, in Ghana, the question of what would be in this solar PV program, what would be the maximum allowed install capacity is of course important to not create an overlap with other programs that are supporting larger scale activities, and also to concur with the domestic licensing procedures. Next. And so that's the background. The KliK Foundation has basically 3 propositions out to attract project developer and induce mitigation activities on the ground. The slide before just showed how much still. I'm hesitating to say a risk, but in the end, it is a risk for a project developer to start without exactly knowing if and how the whole project and program could fit into the whole scheme of the strategy and priorities of the host country. So there needs to be like the pillar A, as we say, we provide a development grant for proposal that we consider as suited or promising, and with this development grant, the project proponent may jointly with the government develop the design document that ultimately will constitute the basis for the authorization decision. Then after the authorization, we support the projects with a purchase agreement to secure the long-term operation of the activity, so the mitigation output is sustained. And in relation with both the pillar A and B, there is a significant capacity building effect on a very concrete level by testing and also a little bit pushing the regulatory procedures. And here also with respect or in relation with the implementation of the concrete activities, there is always an option to add on elements that also synergize or help the more general level of the implementation of the Article 6 framework in domestic or in the government. I think next, yeah. I think for the benefit of time, I'd be very short on these. This is just to explain a bit these pillars. Important pillar A, we have a web page on Ghana. There is an application process. We have to revise this application process a little bit in the light of this very fresh detailed rules that have been published by Switzerland and also by Ghana to give a maximum of information to the developer as to what is required and how to prepare. And as I said, through the submission, you could request a development grant. Then pillar B is basically the purchase agreement. That's the next slide. That largely bases on the business model that underlies the design document. So we are talking of business cases. And as I said, pillar C, that will be the next slide. An important element is that the administrative capacities are ramped up by using the administration and by having the administration really doing decisions and running the processes as well. So in the beginning, there is very often a bit of an ad hoc process, but then there is a learning curve that will be also supported by the KliK Foundation. Next. I can be brief on this. Daniel Benefoh mentioned and even more activities that are going on in Ghana. So the first are on the validation and will result hopefully in authorization and also then a subsequent launch of these structures within this year. Next slide. Sorry. 2022, that's the website and the application support. This is like standing. We expect that we will not be able to support small projects like solar PV individually. We have to look at program structures that really effectively can promote investments into, for example, solar PV, and these structures will become really available to the private sector that is not into carbon business, but implementer, investor, technology provider then in 2024. So, next. Good. This is the link to the Ghana website and also the newsletter. We also have an international newsletter for other countries, and with that, I'd like to stop here. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Mischa, for your presentation and for pointing out the KliK's role, the support that is being provided, and the structural arrangements that enable this cooperation. I consider that this is clearly a way to show the importance of the synergies and the collaborative work. Then, to close the presentation section, I'm glad to introduce our last speaker, Ms. Bianca Gichangi, sorry for my pronunciation, who is the coordinator of the Eastern African Alliance on Carbon Markets and Climate Finance. She will present some of the readiness efforts that are being made in Eastern Africa and some lessons learned that could be applied there. So, just a minute. So, Bianca, glad to see you here, and the floor is yours. I'm gonna change, yeah. Wait a minute. Yeah.
Thank you for the introduction. Pronunciation was great. Thanks. So I'll be giving some background on the Alliance and also just trying to relate it to Dr. Benefoh's presentation to see what we can learn from Ghana as well. Next slide. Yeah, great. So just as a bit of a background, we have countries in the region, Eastern Africa, that participated in market activities, under the KP, the Clean Development Mechanism, and also voluntary carbon market activities. But now we're in an era where they have also referred to using Article 6 in their NDCs, and for those that have updated theirs as well, they have referred to this. And they do need to participate and shape and enhance, how they will do this with this new set of market mechanisms and how to access this carbon finance. So this requires a lot more clarity because, NDCs are not too specific sometimes. So you need a bit more clarity specifically on Article 6 and the capacity to implement these cooperative approaches under 6.2 and the mechanism under 6.4. So the Eastern Africa Alliance on Carbon Markets and Climate Finance currently has countries comprising of Burundi, Ethiopia, Kenya, Rwanda, Tanzania, Uganda, and Sudan. Next slide, please. Great. So to address this issue of making sure that they participate, the Alliance is really addressed at making sure that there is long-term participation of these members in carbon market activities. And it's very country-driven. So all the activities that we do are based on the requests that are submitted by these countries, and they comprise a work plan. So each of the countries nominate a focal point, usually from the Ministry of Environment or an Environmental Management Authority, and the focal points really participate in the Alliance activities and take the information and knowledge and disseminate it back home. So currently we are hosted at the UNFCCC Regional Collaboration Center in Kampala, which is based at the East African Development Bank, and we are supported a lot by BMWK, the Ministry of Economics and Climate Action in Germany. I think they changed their name recently. And the SIACA initiative, which is also managed by the UNFCCC. And really, we work to enhance Article 6 implementation. Of course, before the decision, this was a lot of readiness activities, but now we're really looking forward to implementation, and we do support active and well-coordinated participation of negotiators during the UNFCCC negotiations. That's the COPs and now also the SBs. And of course, being a regional alliance, we definitely promote a lot of regional exchange of experiences and best practice in aspects of carbon pricing. Next slide, please. Great. So then our alliance readiness efforts have comprised of many different activities that I've summarized in this slide. And I'll just take you through them quite briefly. But we've done a lot of trainings, which we've started on capacity building. So we've had a lot of pre-COP sessions where we train the negotiators on critical issues on Article 6, the language, the terminologies, and because it can be quite technical. And this year, at least, we've started also training for the SBs, because this is where a lot of the technical work happens. And we also have received very specific requests from some of the countries. So we actually had a corresponding adjustments training before COP26 last year, which expounded on what we're seeing in the text right now, the methodologies that are there on averaging and trajectories, and had very practical examples and templates that we were using. We've also done a handbook for the negotiators on Article 6, and we have done an institutional and infrastructure assessment, which I'll go into a bit more detail on. We have done carbon market profiles because there has been some activity in all these countries, so they need to understand where they are to see how they can go ahead moving forward. So this compiled all the data on CDM activities and voluntary carbon market activities. We also do private sector dialogues where we bring the project developers in the region together because they have concerns about Article 6, just understanding how it will impact them, but also for them to share their experiences on their projects and what they have concerns on, and just really a lot of sharing of experiences. And in terms of specific activities, we have done specific trainings for youth, which was requested by Kenya. We've done some for the private sector in Sudan. Uganda requested for very specific trainings on developing country positions for Article 6, and Rwanda has requested on climate finance. And we also, lastly, have done some online carbon taxation courses on carbon pricing because we do also look at carbon pricing as a whole beyond markets. And then, of course, a lot of peer-to-peer learning. So with this, we collaborate a lot also with the West African Alliance, which is a bit older than us, so we do get a lot of inspiration from them. And we have had roundtable sessions. One of them was on bilateral agreements, where we had the Swiss and Japan coming in and interacting with the alliance members on how to develop these bilateral agreements. We've participated in the Africa Climate Weeks, webinars and regional workshops with CPLC, and we do participate in Innovate for Climate as well. So I just want to focus on the institutional and infrastructure assessment, which is bullet number 4, and quite relevant to today's presentation. So this assessment actually, just leave it there, thanks. So this assessment looked at the existing institutional and infrastructures in all the member countries, and we identified gaps and provided recommendations. So each of the countries received a report on this, and we also did a synthesis report, which is actually public on our website. And this highlighted the 5 areas that really require a lot of support and capacity building. And that would be in authorization, applying corresponding adjustments, and developing sustainable development criteria, reporting and tracking, and there's just one last one that I have to confirm, but yes, ensuring environmental integrity, of course. So developing very robust baselines. So this assessment, of course, has been a basis for what capacity requirements are needed. And then we've also done a fresh round of assessment needs that the countries have put together. So based on our work plan and based on the outcomes of this assessment, we have new identification areas that are really priority in implementing Article 6. Next slide. So now this is where we can learn from Ghana. Because we really prioritized 4 areas. I'll speak on 3 because the last one I wasn't sure where Ghana was, so I had to listen to the presentation. But the first one is on policy and procedure development. This is something that all the countries have agreed and seen that they definitely need procedures to implement these parts, to implement Article 6. And these procedures need to be arched in an overarching legal framework, either through policy, regulation, or as we've heard from Dr. Benefoh, a very comprehensive framework. And we've also highlighted that there's definitely a need for the institutions to be very clear on the roles and responsibilities of who's doing what, and to also have the human capacity to implement these things. So this is a stage where the countries really need to form their interministerial working groups, their task forces, and have dedicated Article 6 team members to actually be able to implement this. On a technical level, you need the procedures, as mentioned before, for authorization, corresponding adjustment tools, and the criteria for sustainable development. And it's so great to see that Ghana already has done this. So it's definitely something we can learn from and to go deeper into what it is required for authorization. We also see that Article 6 infrastructure is really important, and also because Article 6 doesn't operate in a silo. You have to link it to NDC reporting, so your infrastructure has to be linked to the NDC registry. So it's great to see also that Ghana mentioned they have a national registry, and they're trying to also maintain an NDC registry as well. We also see that their bilateral agreement with Switzerland does give a bit of criteria on the registries, or does mention about it, but we definitely see that this infrastructure has to comply with the guidance of 6.2 as well. The other area I wanted to talk about was developing project proposals under cooperative approaches. So this is always a request that comes from the countries. They want to see activities on the ground, but how to actually do this. And I think the examples from KliK are quite a good example. You can see they already have a portfolio of projects that will soon commence: the solar PV, the improved cook stoves, the waste landfill composting, rice and alternative wetting and drying. So you're seeing new aspects that probably, like in agriculture, that weren't there before, and the focus on large-scale activities as well. So this is definitely something we can see that because they already have the frameworks in place, the activities are already ready to start. And I think this is something that Eastern Africa can learn from, that once they have these frameworks, it really sends a good positive signal for the private investors to come in, and then the projects and activities and the groundwork will actually start being seen. So we really have to commend Ghana for their proactivity on that. And the last one, which I know is not on the slide, is on training. We really see training and stakeholder awareness as a very, very important part, and we see it in two aspects. So very thorough training for the leading institutions and the government players who will be implementing, but also basic knowledge training for other carbon market players. So now private sector, consultants, financial institutions, basically anyone who just wants to understand carbon markets and have a say in it. But that's a very important aspect, and we're also glad to hear that Ghana is incorporating that as well. So I will stop there. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Bianca, for your presentation. Thanks for enlightening us how learning by doing approaches become a broader scale learning strategy. I consider this is highly relevant, of course, for the cooperative approaches. Now, moving on with the agenda, I'd like to start a conversation with some specific questions to our panelists. Given the detailed information received about the progress of the implementation of this bilateral cooperation agreement, which can become a good guidance to encourage countries to embark on cooperative approaches. So, and therefore, I'd like to start with you, Veronica. So if you could please turn on your microphone, and maybe I could just show you. Yep. Okay, so Veronica, I want to start asking what are the critical challenges in getting Article 6 action off the ground?
Thank you very much. Well, I think it's actually, it sounds easy, but the main challenge we detect is to start the national discussion about it. Sounds simple, but that seems to be the biggest stumbling block, because it hasn't been there necessarily before, so someone needs to start it. And sometimes this may come from the international level, from international partners, but what we see is that in the end, every country will need to go through this national discussion on how and if they want to use international carbon markets. So the earlier this is started, the more informed and ready the country is to also then look at the options that there are. Secondly, once the discussion is started, it seems extremely important to develop a mandate to some government entity to lead, to coordinate that discussion, because otherwise it doesn't move forward. And this mandate, from what we see, should involve the establishment of the national framework to drive the national discussion, and we strongly believe it's helpful to early engage with international partners, because then you see the other side of the cooperation coin and hear what the other countries are preparing for. So that is the critical challenges that we see. They certainly seem to be, can be overcome once there is some awareness and some will to move forward, and also some courage, of course, this entails. Then we strongly believe that the establishment of the national frameworks of the international cooperation can very much go in parallel to these discussions. It's not sequential to each other. This informs mutually the one and the other discussion. So also, at least our bilateral scheme, we strongly believe they're built in a very flexible way to allow integration of these evolving national discussions as we learn from both sides in the cooperation. But this is all handleable. I think the very critical point is to start the discussion and develop a mandate in the country. Who drives this, and who can these entities speak to also at the international level?
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Veronica. I also consider that this is also like a really big challenge to start discussing this, and also it's going to be like one of the main issues to address in order to start encouraging another countries. And following up the importance of disseminate these efforts at regional level, for example, I'd like to continue with you, Bianca, asking how do the difference in country readiness impact your work as the coordinator of the regional initiative, like Eastern Alliance?
Yeah. Well, each country has their own processes on how to do things, but the good thing is we've identified the commonalities. So when you look, for example, say on the institutional arrangements that Veronica is talking about, you have experience from what we had under the KP, under CDM. So some countries had committees, the DNAs were in certain ministries, but now what we have is a situation where we know there's a lot more requirements, there's authorization and all these things, and there's a lot more involvement of other ministries. So it's important to definitely say who's the leading institution, but also how do you play on the experience that's been there before? Because if you had an environmental authority that was implementing and has all the knowledge on some of these very technical things, do you let them continue and then you fit it into the NDC ministry? Where does finance come in all this? When you're doing your bilateral agreements, is foreign affairs involved? There's a lot of questions, and countries are different because some countries don't need foreign affairs to do some of these bilaterals, but there are some countries in our region that do. So you have to take that into consideration, but at the end of the day, they all need the same thing. They need some policy anchoring, and they definitely need the procedures. The good thing is with procedures is because the requirements are the same in the guidance, you can come up with generic procedures and apply the same thing across the region. But then, of course, you can take it through your national stakeholder process. But there's definitely ways of just making sure that basic elements are captured. Some countries have already started mapping out their needs, and now they're matching with development partners, while others are doing terms of references to sort of compile everything and do everything together. But the main important thing is that the underlying basic requirements of making sure you get authorization right, corresponding adjustments right, that's something that's common to all of them. So you can find a way of fitting it into their processes. Yeah.
Good. Well, yeah, thank you so much. I think that is a really highly highly relevant point about how at national level you need to focus on certain procedures and to adjust according to the national conditions, right? So what you just said about the level of country readiness led me to another question, this case for Daniel. So I'd like to focus this question on the enabling conditions to engage in collaborative action, starting, for example, with the motivation and the benefits that countries could get to participate in these approaches. So I'd like to ask you, Daniel, what did Ghana's government consider when they signed the agreement with Switzerland? What triggered the government to explore this opportunity?
Thank you very much. This is a difficult question, but I just want to go back to what Veronica said, and I think that probably would help. We have to start from two very important lessons. The bad but hard lessons from the CDM and the cynicism around the what is unknown about the Article 6. So we were confronted with that. That's the first point. So how do you convince multiple stakeholders across the government, across the private sector, who have had some various unpleasant experiences with the CDM, and at the same time convince them that what is yet to be born, or what is coming, will be different from the previous one. So we have to overcome that. We have to also overcome the multiple variable interests of the various stakeholders who had different expectations and understanding of this new baby. Right? The third one is quite crucial. The third one is really about the time and the resource requirements. Because at some point the only binding framework was the requirement in the NDCs, right? The requirement that Ghana is intending to mobilize resources from the market to support the implementation of the NDC. So that was a binding, or that was a rallying force. And therefore, how do we put or give light to that policy requirement? So we have to ride on the back of the fact that insofar as the government is intending to implement and achieve the requirement of NDCs, the market presents an opportunity for us to be able to raise that or to work around that and rally around that to be able to mobilize stakeholders and convey the policy makers. So for me, the key point is that the key binding factor or the key rallying factor was the need or the recognition to make sure that the NDCs are implemented and achieved. And one of the means to do so is the use of the market. That for me was what did the trigger. The other one, which is a very important lesson, is raising champions who would dedicate time and effort to be able to make sure that there is attention on this. That is what I think probably helped. So we have to really convince people and sustain the effort to the extent that we could over time bring people along. And I'm happy to say that it is easy said and done. And as Veronica said, it takes effort and consistent effort, but at least it pays.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. Thanks a lot, Daniel, for this very complete answer. And of course, I want to also highlight that this is really important in order to understand how a country is gonna perceive the benefits of participating in this kind of approaches. And following this topic, I'd like to discuss a bit more about the rules and the market conditions, let's say that we all know that Article 6.2 it's gonna place in order to operate these mechanisms. So I would like to ask you, Mischa, also regarding the conditions for the transaction of ITMOs, what are the determinants of a fair price for ITMO transaction from KliK's perspective, regarding, of course, your role as in this bilateral cooperation agreement in this kind of sense. Yeah.
Yeah, so the question of a fair price. The question is what is fair? I mean, I try to explain the way how we operate as a foundation. It is a buyer market, and what we truly want to do is with our engagement and our means to make the needle move, so that to trigger action by private entities to do Article 6 mitigation activities. And to do activities means you have to do the investments, you have to do the business plan, you have to do not only the operation, but you have also the obligation to verify, to monitor, to report up to the request to transfer. So there's a lot of obligations with that, and these obligations always turn into costs. And the relation between costs and expected mitigation outcomes, that's basically what for us is the fair price which is needed to initiate a mitigation outcome and to initiate the investment decision. And that's basically the core element of a fair price. And then, of course, there will be another bunch of cost elements that come into play, the cost for debt, the cost for import taxation, the cost for revenue tax, value-added tax, SOP. So there will be a lot of additional costs coming. We don't know them yet. But then we also have a willingness to pay. And so the fair price somehow lies in between our willingness to pay and basically that price that really makes for the investor, the project owner, the project viable. We are not, as a buyer, we are not buying climate change action. We are just trying to create the enabling condition, the financial enabling condition that renders a business viable. And this is our role. We are not a bank. And this is also leading to the fact that we are not. I mean, price is a very limited concept, because we're not talking of prices. Price is one element typically in a funding structure that runs over 10 years. It is also related to milestone payments, and if you we also could have a front loading. We can have price differentiations according to volumes. And this shouldn't be disregarded. The de-risking of funding very often is much more important to an investor than simply seeing a price. And we are also not prepared to price in unjustified interest rates from local banks. So it's not a price; it's a whole structure to support the activity going forward and sustaining operation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mischa. I think this is really clear that we need to also look forward for working in these market conditions. And yeah, well, this was indeed a great and enlightening conversation. I would like to take these last 10 minutes, maybe less, for the Q&A session. So if the audience have some questions, please raise your hand. My colleague is gonna pass the microphone. So the floor is open. I see just one hand. Please briefly introduce yourself.
My name is Suyong Chung. I'm from Republic of Korea. I have some questions to the Switzerland. I'm wondering, I recognize that there are certain ITMOs to be transferred to Switzerland, and then it will be used not only for the NDC implementation, but also for other other purposes. In that sense, how would you consider using the transferred ITMOs for the purpose of NDC implementation? That's my first question. I have another question that it might be related to Switzerland or the KliK Foundation. Would you, Article 6 text doesn't necessarily say that I recognize that working together with the developing countries is very, very important. But at the same time, in order to expand our opportunity scope, then Article 6 doesn't prevent us from the working together, say from Switzerland's point of view, with say another industrial countries, thereby maybe developing the mega project based on Article 6. In that sense, both Switzerland, government of Switzerland, or the KliK Foundation, would you consider even developing the Article 6 activities, not only with the developing countries, but also with some other industrial countries as well? So that's my second question. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I let you, Veronica, answer first, and then if you want to jump in, Mischa, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed, our agreements allow flexible use of the ITMOs for NDC achievement or for voluntary climate purposes of any entity. And in that sense, they do not accounted neither to the Swiss NDC if the other purposes track is pursued. These ITMOs are not accounted to the Swiss NDC. We will not include that in our NDC achievement. And equally, on the host country side, in any case, corresponding adjustment is applied. So also, these ITMOs are not accounted towards the NDC of the host country. So if these ITMOs are being used to voluntary climate purposes, they can be claimed as not double counted and not double claimed. We also have incorporated in the agreements steps that we assure that these ITMOs are not reflected in other international national systems. So if, for example, a voluntary unit exists and is recognized as an ITMO through the agreement, it needs to be cancelled. I think it was very impressive to see how Ghana is already foreseen to operationalize that at the national level in practical terms. And this is, in fact, very important, it seems to us. It allows access also of private or subnational entities, states and cities who also have voluntary climate targets to access Paris Agreement aligned credits. And thereby they can contribute to closing the ambition gap between the NDCs and the 1.5 degrees goal. So this is the background of it, and this is how it is being implemented. To the second question, I fully agree. The Article 6 does not limit cooperation between any countries who are party to the Paris Agreement. We, as Switzerland, currently are indeed also speaking, for example, to Iceland. However, this is much more focusing on negative emission technologies rather than what we know from emission reduction activities at this point. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Veronica. So, Mischa, do you want to jump in? Or?
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, generally, neither the bilateral agreements nor the national framework of Switzerland nor the KliK Foundation is we are agnostic towards countries, so every country basically is treated in the same way. And what specifically the KliK Foundation concerns, I mean, we are sensitive to price, and and it also has to fit into the ambition raising narrative. So if we are working in a country, then we for sure we would look at the upper end of the cost wise, at the upper end of the marginal abatement cost curve, and which is also the case. I mean, irrespective of a what country. But my expectation would be that we would end up with prices, speaking of developed countries, where we would not have any difference from our domestic activities, and we'd rather would implement for these costs activities in Switzerland. Yeah.
Okay, thanks a lot, Mischa. So we have another question from the audience. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yes, Eder Zanetti. I'm here with the Green Farm CO2-free. We are developing nature-based solutions in Brazil, and we use a registry platform over there, and we start doing cooperation with Ivory Coast and moving into Ghana. I will be meeting some other African countries here, so I was wondering how this process of developing this digital platform works from the KliK Foundation, and in this process of mutual recognition, if you are going into that, and how to access, if so.
Okay, thanks a lot. So Mischa or
Yeah.
Veronica, I don't know.
And maybe quickly on the digital platform, I mean, it's a website. And you can hit the button and submit in a structured format the mitigation outcome ideas, and then we take it forward. So it's not much of a platform. Maybe I was misleading in my explanations there. Regarding the nature-based solution, that was very quick, that Veronica mentioned that Switzerland would not, or the KliK Foundation cannot use nature-based solution-based units for its compliance, and therefore we would also not request this type. So forestry for KliK Foundation is not on the menu.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot. I'm so sorry, but we have like a limitation of time. Maybe, can I? No. Okay. Okay. No. So yeah. Well, I'm so sorry, but we need to finish here. But I invite you also to ask directly to the panelists the questions that you may have. Thank you so much for your participation. I'm aware that this was a really hard time because it's lunchtime and it's Saturday. So thanks a lot for your participation, and thanks for your inputs, and enjoy you like a rest weekend. Thanks.